I am Martin Fitzpatrick, and I am your great uncle.
Yeah.
With the emphasis on great.
What got you interested in our family history?
Well, a lot of it stems probably from my father, which was your grandfather or your great-grandfather.
Yeah.
And he was a good storyteller. So he told a lot of stories, and I tried to write them down as I went, or I tried to remember them. And now I've got to the point where I can actually research some of this stuff and actually see it.
All right.
So basically, I inherited it.
Yeah. So, where did you get your information? I guess that would come.
Yes,
more from your
so this leads back from that last question.
Yeah.
You got a lot of it started out collecting stuff. As you see on the table, I've got memorabilia from centuries back and back into the turn of the 19th. So some of the stuff I have here is over 100 years old. Beyond that, I don't have much, but that, and then I did most of my research before the electronic age, so I started off doing paper research.
Oh, yeah.
And visiting the Mormon Church, who have been doing family tree histories forever, and it's almost as if they had a premonition that this was going to happen and this information was going to be valuable someday, because it actually is. So through Ancestry.ca, there's another website called Graves. What's the one of the Graves? You can look up headstones. Headstones, gravestones, I think.
Yeah.
And you just type that in and type the name in, and it gives you all the listings. And you look at them, and quite often you can get the information off there: birth dates, and dates, well, the day they died, and where they're buried.
Money have you spent finding out the information?
Probably not as much as your mom would have. She traveled all over the place. I did most of it from sitting in my chair or behind my computer desk. Most of my research was done online. After I got going, it just it expanded exponentially with the internet.
Yeah.
So it didn't cost a lot of money. It's
Yeah.
basically. The other thing with Ancestry.ca and some of those websites, you get like a month free trial. So what you do is you do all your prep work ahead of time. You jump on the website for a month and bash it. Get as much out of them as you can and then drop it. So it doesn't cost you a dime.
Yeah. Where's your family search taken you?
Well, I have gone to Ireland, although I didn't go back to where our ancestors were, but I did walk on the land. I've been to where my father was born. I've been to Manitoulin Island, where his siblings were all born. I've done a little bit of touring down through the upper New York State. Your mom did a lot more expanse down there, and Cornwall area. That's the areas where mostly where we went, and Scotland. I went to Scotland on my mother's side to Gervan and Maple, which is where my mother's mother and father were born, and where they came from, Scotland.
How far back have you been able to go with your research?
Back is actually the very first one that I have was 1732.
Wow.
Peter Patrick Fitzpatrick. Now, this is an interesting thing with, I couldn't go back that far. I kind of got, as when I was doing my initial research, I could only go back as far as memory. So my father's sister, great aunt Lynn, she was a history buff, and she gave me a lot of the old stories and the names and dates, and that's as far as I could get. Well then, I think your mom did some research and found out I always thought that we came over during the Irish potato famine, which was in 1800 sometime. It was in the steamship era. Well, turned out we came before the American Revolution, which we probably came over from Ireland and we're probably going to get into some of the other questions, but I'll expand on that now. They were from Ireland, on my father's side. They came over probably as indentured servants. I can't find that anywhere, although it was in some of the details. So they came over basically with their landowners, and the landowners were probably British aristocrats that were the landholders in Ireland. So they decided to come over to Americas, while it was still a British colony, and make their fortune. So they came over with them, and this was a Johnson family. There was Sir Guy Johnson, and there was two of them. I got information on that anyway. And both of them were military men, and so we are descended from a military family that came over with them. So they were English and we were Irish servants supporting them.
When did the Fitzpatrick family, when they lived in Ireland, what did they do for work?
They would have been farmers and, like soldiers. So whether they were farmers most of their lives anyway. That's what they always resorted back to. My father did the same thing. So we never lost that ability to farm. But as they were called to duty, they became soldiers, and apparently not very good ones, as the story unfolds.
Life like for them back in Ireland?
I would imagine when they came over, it was during the American Revolution. They fought on the side of the British. They had land holdings in upstate New York. Now, one of the Patrick Fitzpatrick, his wife actually had land and livestock bequeathed to her from the landowner. So it makes you wonder how she actually did that, because that's not something normal that you gave a servant. So
yeah.
She must have been special around the household. So they had to carve their homes out of the bush. They basically lived amongst the Indians, the Mohawk Indians, especially in upstate New York. They were very close to them. Sir Guy Johnson, who was the military leader that they worked for and served under, became an Indian agent all in through all those upstate New Yorks, right over to Michigan. He was very well liked by the Indians, by the way. And the Indians fought on the side of the British as well, probably did more military service and performed better than the Redcoats. So it was a hard life, I would imagine. And then during the American Revolution, their lands were confiscated because they fought on the wrong side of the war. The Americans won that war, and so they were basically refugees. So, including this Sir Guy Johnson and John Johnson, I think John Johnson was the other name. Mm-hmm. They had to leave upstate New York and lost everything, all their property, all their belongings, all their livestock. Just they got away with their lives, and somehow got across the St. Lawrence River. I think originally they went up into the Montreal area, because there's quite a few of them ended up in Montreal, and then they migrated down or upstream towards Cornwall, and were given land from the British. They actually, in our family, we had to petition them because they didn't get land, because some of their military history was a little clouded, their loyalties, but they had to prove their descendancy, and they actually got, I think it was 100 acres, or it was a small plot of land along the St. Lawrence in the Cornwall area. But it would have been rough. When they went up that way into Cornwall area, there was nothing. They They had a plot of land and they had to carve it out of the bush. And that happened for generations afterwards, because as land was given to them free from the Canadian government to colonize would have been Upper Canada.
Yeah.
They migrated along with the free land and did that right up till almost my would have been great grandparents' area. So would have been around 1850s, I guess, when they actually stopped getting land grants.
Who immigrated to North America and why?
There was two Fitzpatricks that were actually fought in the American Revolution for the British. One was a Patrick Fitzpatrick and his son Peter Fitzpatrick. Now the father deserted the British Army twice, which was punishable by firing squad. So he should not have lived, but did somehow. And he actually left the British Army. Had to basically run away.
Yeah.
And then as a new conflict came, or he was starving to death, and that was the way to get employment and to get fed, join the army again under the same name, but it was all paper trail. And then they needed them, so they brought him back. He deserted the second time. He ended up, we have no idea where he's buried. He went incognito, raised the family, or I wouldn't say raised the family, left the family behind, and just, we have no idea what happened to him. Now, his son, Peter Fitzpatrick, was caught by the Americans during the American Revolution as a spy. They charged him as a spy. So he should have been hung as well. And he was in jail in Schenectady or someplace in upper New York State, in jail, waiting his outcome, and the American Revolution came and he got pardoned, and then he joined back with the Johnson family and went back with them and settled up into the Cornwall. So going back to my father was always a joker, and he'd tell stories, and he would every now and then throw out a comment that was out of the blue, and he said that he'd say something along the line like, well, you're descended from a long line of highwaymen and horse thieves. Well, I always thought, like, what a strange thing to say. Our ancestors are highwaymen, which are basically robbers, and horse thieves. Well, as it turned out, we were army deserters, and so somehow that legend got passed down through the family, got watered down, and we became highwaymen and horse thieves. So that's the story, how that went. We're descendants of the Peter, who was the one that was caught as the spy.
Yeah.
Because as far as as his father went, the Patrick Fitzpatrick, he was like, what they call it, he wasn't qualified for any kind of pension or anything like that, because he deserted twice. Basically, he was like a criminal as far as they were concerned. So our ancestry just went back to this Peter Fitzpatrick. All the way down. Actually, the one thing I was going to mention to you is that this lineage from 1776, 1750, I think they came to America, descended all the way down through to my generation. I had two daughters. My brother, he had a son, so he could pass the name on. And Ryan actually had, this is my brother Ross, he had son Ryan, and Ryan actually had children, one natural daughter, and he adopted his wife's son. So our lineage stopped in this generation. There are no more Fitzpatricks beyond Ryan. Ryan is the last one after 200 and some odd years. Can you do the math? Well, how long we've been here? Since 1750, so it's over 200 years, yeah. Sad, but now on the other hand, there's Fitzpatricks from New York City to California and from Mexico all the way to the Yukon, because they were a prolific bunch and there was dozens of them. So we dropped the ball, but somebody else picked it up along the way. I think my cousin on my uncle's side, he had some man children. We'll call it. So the name lives on.
What did Simon Peter Fitzpatrick do on Manitoulin Island?
Now, your mom did the research on that, and as far as I know, they seem to follow the lumber business.
Yeah.
And I think he was a clerk in the lumber company at Manitoulin. So they went from Cornwall up into kind of tiny township in the Barrie Midland area, Oro, O-R-O. And free land again, they got migrated kind of north. They were over in Toronto for a while, York. They followed the lumber trail. So as they were building all the houses down in the south, the trees were going further and further north. So they ended up Manitoulin Island. Then they went Manitoulin Island to Fort William. And then from Fort William, they followed the lumber business again, because when Henry Ford came along, my grandfather left Fort William, which is now called Thunder Bay. This is where my father was born. They went to Detroit to build homes for Henry Ford, for the workers in his factory. And I still have tools in my garage with his initials carved in a saw and a plane. So they, as a lumber, they'd be up there in the lumber business, chopping trees down and shipping them, and somebody say, you know what, why don't you get on with the boat? They need carpenters in Detroit. So they did.
Simon Peter Fitzpatrick is buried alone on Manitoulin Island, so why would that be?
And when I was doing the research, the census is taken every 10 years, the Canadian census. Every 10 years, always on the number that ends in a 1. So it would be 1801, 1811, 1821, 1831. I don't know whether it was because of that highwaymen and horse thieves, but on the 0 year, they always moved. So every 10 years they moved. They didn't stay in one spot very long. They still aren't. They still migrate all over the place. To this day,
On the zeros.
250 some odd years later.
So
So that's why he's buried there alone.
Yeah.
They were there for a work term, and they set up some businesses, him and my uncle. And there's never, he's buried alone, but they never traveled alone. They always went with a bunch of brothers or cousins. So they didn't lone wolf it.
yeah. Where did all of the other Fitzpatrick relatives end up?
Well, it ended up, my father, it was when they moved to Detroit, and I just saw that note in some of Aunt Lynn's stuff here. 1926. Yeah, 1926. And when you look the research up of the Henry Ford, he built the homes in 1919, 1920. But that was in this one subdivision. When I just did research on that tonight to try and get some facts out of it. But I'm quite sure that he expanded his plants long beyond 1926. That was like just after World War I and between the two wars. So there would have been a lot more houses required, a lot more work. So the whole family moved to Detroit. There was my father, his brother, and 2 sisters. And they all stayed married American spouses to remain in the United States. My father and my uncle, which was Uncle Ross, not my brother Ross, but my father's brother Ross, they started a gas station business before the Depression, up around Flint, Michigan. And when the Depression came, my dad, things got very dire, and he came back to Canada, and he was the only one. And he came back and lived with his maternal grandmother, which was the Irwin family, and lived on the farm with them in the Owen Sound area, which is where he eventually met my mother. So the other ones, the sisters, they lived, his older sister married a guy that was in the auto industry. He worked for McCord, and I think they made radiators for like the Ramblers, because she always drove a Rambler. And my Aunt Lynn she started out with National Cash Register and then went into that, and she got into the business line, and she became the first female, can you help me with that? Data analyst or something, some kind of early with the business forms. So anyway, so she went from Detroit, ended up with the American Automobile Club in California, and she spent most of her working career in California, and then moved back to Indiana, and after her sister's husband died, and they traveled extensively throughout the United States in a Winnebago motorhome with Aunt Lynn doing all the driving and Aunt Flora doing the navigating, and then fighting back and forth like Lucy and Ricky Ricardo. So, and my Uncle Ross, he went to Washington, and I have no idea what kind of, he ended up being a custodian at a high school, or at a school. He was like the janitor. He ended up being, but a smart enough man, but that's, you know, at that stage of his life. My father was like a jack of all trades and master of none. He got a new job about every 5 years his entire life. He never stayed longer than that, and sometimes less. You know? And always resorted in between back to farm. Yeah, I did his eulogy, and I listed all the jobs he had from his apprenticeship on, kind of thing. He was a machinist, and he sold investments, and he was a meat cutter, and he worked on the steamship that goes between Tobermory and Manitoulin Island on the Norisle, the SS Norisle. He worked as an oiler on that. He was manager of a brassiere factory in Oil, and they made brassiere for lovable brassieres.
So how did your parents meet, and when?
Yeah, well, my mother was born, here's the story. Her parents came from Scotland, and the grandfather, John McCormick, came over from Scotland on a promise of probably land and riches by some fast-talking salesman. And I've been back to where they came from, and it is the most beautiful part of the country. And they're right on the ocean of the Scottish, and the hills in the background, and everything is so green, and there's like water everywhere and beaches. And they sent him to Weyburn, Saskatchewan, where there is no water, no trees, nothing green, and he must have been the loneliest man. I don't think he ever went back. His wife, Valentine, she did. She went back to visit. She still had sisters and people there. So she had two brothers, and they left from Weyburn, Saskatchewan. They were all pretty intelligent, and they were both mining engineers for Inco, for the nickel companies in the mining companies in Sudbury. So she kind of went to Sudbury, you know, on their coattails, and became a telephone operator in Sudbury. And I don't know for what reason she got sent to Owen Sound, become an operator in Owen Sound. And there she met my father. My father was living with his maternal grandparents, and somehow they hooked up. My father was 4F in World War II. There's not a lot of war heroes in our family. I searched back through the records, and I can't find like any. I know they were involved in the war 1812, but
kept getting captured.
Instead of getting, they weren't fast runners. My father was exempt from service in World War II because he was 4F, which meant he failed his physical. He had high blood pressure, and that kept him out of the war. All his life he was treated for high blood pressure, and the one doctor he had when he was about 75 or 80 years old looked at him. He says, "You're the picture of fitness." He goes, "There's no way you should have high blood pressure." He goes, "What I want you to do is take the blood pressure checking thing home and do it at home." And he went home, and it was normal. So what the doctor figured out he had white coat syndrome, which is a fear of doctors. And so whenever he walked into a hospital, he hated doctors, never went to a dentist his entire life. He died with all his teeth.
Oh my.
And they took him off his high blood pressure medication and everything else, and it was nothing but the fear of doctors. White coat syndrome, they call it.
What would life have been for them in the Graybers area in the mid-1900s?
The mid 1900s.
Yeah.
Okay, that was going back into my area.
Yeah,
Well, when I was born, they said they took my mom to the hospital with horse and sleigh because the roads, there was so much snow up in the Wyerton area that they couldn't get to the hospital in time, and it was in December. So we grew up on a 300-acre farm. We had every kind of animal you could ever imagine: ducks, sheep, pigs, cattle, horses, two kinds of cattle. We had dairy cattle and we had beef cattle. Chickens, all kinds of different kinds of chickens, laying chickens, the eating chickens, bantams, or banties as they call them. Basically it's subsistence. We had a big enough farm, but we had no machinery, and you can't farm without machinery, like other than a single horse. That's all we had. Never had a tractor, never had a hay wagon, never had a mow or anything like that. So we rented most of the farm out all the time, and we just we boarded horses for the Cheshire family in Wyerton that owned a 5 and dime store, and they had I would call it a herd of riding horses. They had one for each family member, and there was 5 of them. So we had their 5 horses. And the one Christmas, my sister and I got ponies for Christmas. We got a pony each. Mine was called Dusty, and hers was called Lori. And we hated them. We wouldn't ride them. We rode them like once or twice each, and finally they gave them away. But it was kind of, it was neat. Like it was like most other kids' dream come true. But if you ever talk to Nancy, she'll tell you that we didn't have any love for horses at all. They were just work.
Yeah.
But it was cold.
Yeah.
It was cold growing up. We had a wood stove in the kitchen when I first remembered it. We didn't have an electric stove. If you wanted to cook something, you cooked on it. And there was a water cistern on the side of it where you kept warm water or heated water. Mm-hmm. It was just a part of the stove. There was mornings that I remember where that water in that stove was frozen. There was a skim of ice over top of it on the stove, and heated with wood in the house. So in the 50s and up into the 60s, before we got an oil furnace and then better appliances, washer, dryer, and I remember the old Ringer washers. And Jeanette got her arm stuck in one. She ran her arm through one. She got a big scar down her arm. So we had all those old appliances, and we did have indoor plumbing. So yeah, it was and the clothes, everything was wool. Itchy, and how those soldiers in World War I put up with those wool uniforms, I'll never imagine. It was awful stuff to wear.
Why did you become UEL? Maybe explain what that is.
Yeah, United Empire Loyal. So if you could do your research back to one of those original soldiers that fought in the American Revolution on the side of the British and can prove your lineage, you have to prove it through your ancestry, so through census forms and family Bibles and all kinds of stuff. There's many ways of doing it. So I found through your mom the lineage. So she gave me the names, and all I had to do was prove it.
Yeah.
So I had to write away to a couple of museums and got some documents printed, and the hardest one I had was my grandfather's birth certificate. We had no proof of them. So I finally found where that was. I had to write away to whoever looks after the records for births and deaths, and they had a record of it, and I got a photocopy, and that cost me like whatever, $20-30. So that's probably the most expensive thing I did for my family tree. So then I thought it'd be kind of cool. Then when I found out and did some research with the United Empire Loyalists, found that you could get proven. So I actually had a certificate, and after I qualified, there's all my research. That's the research on Peter Fitzpatrick. and there's quite a bit more. And then his father's is much thinner. It wasn't as much. It gives the stories about, you know, where they should have been hung or should have been shot, whatever. And there is my certificate that proves I'm as the provided acceptable documentation proving descent from Peter Fitzpatrick, United Empire Loyalist. So once I got that form, I can legally sign my name with the suffix UE, which is United Empire. So all over the British Empire, people that fought in India and Africa and all those countries, we all get this little thing, and I got a pin, and I can sign my name at the end of it.
So,
I just thought it'd be cool to have.
Yeah.
The only thing is I belong to the chapter in Hamilton, and now I'm like 2.5, 3 hours north of that, so it's hard to get to their meetings. But they have guest speakers then, and they, you know, they talk about all the stuff that went on in that war and the War 1812.
What else would you still want to find out about your family history?
One of the biggest things I'd like to find out is what ship they actually came over on. I always thought they came in through Montreal during the potato famine. That's where the most, they landed in Halifax or somewhere, I think.
Right.
That was closer.
Here to
And then
New
they
York.
emigrated to Toronto. But they
came to
didn't.
New
They
York.
came like 100 years before that on a sailing ship. Because most of the Irish that come over in the potato famine, it would have been steamships. So they actually sailed, and that would have been a 6 to 8 week voyage. Very few of them survived. A lot of them died. There was a lot of births at sea where people were, children were born on the ship. Our family has a history of longevity, so it's probably due to the fact that all the weak ones died off, like, didn't make it. So there was the strongest and the fittest survived, so that we got a long history of longevity in our family on both sides. Aunt Lynn, there's a picture of her, and she lived to be 105. I was at her 105th birthday party in Michigan.